Most people panic when something breaks, not because the problem is impossible, but because deep down, they've already decided they're not the kind of person who can fix it. So the moment life goes wrong, their brain starts searching for rescue. Someone smarter, someone calmer, someone who knows what they're doing. And then there are those people, the ones who stay weirdly calm, the ones who stare at the mess in silence for a few seconds and somehow start figuring it out. A broken bone, a crashing computer, a family argument, a relationship falling apart, a financial disaster. They don't always know the answer immediately, but they move toward the problem instead of away from it. And if you've ever stood next to someone like that, you've probably wondered something quietly painful. What do they have that I don't? Because to you, they almost seem built differently, but they're not. And the truth behind why some people become fixers is much deeper than intelligence. In fact, for a lot of them, it started as survival. There's a moment that happens in childhood that changes people forever, usually small, usually invisible. A child notices something is wrong. Maybe the sink is leaking. Maybe the internet stopped working. Maybe two adults are fighting in the kitchen. Maybe their mother is crying quietly in another room. And while everyone else freezes, that child starts paying attention, watching, studying, trying to understand how problems work, not because they're naturally gifted, but because their nervous system learned something very early. If nobody fixes this, things become unsafe. So they became the person who fixes things, not all at once, slowly, piece by piece. They learned how to stay calm during chaos, how to think while everyone else panicked, how to become useful, and usefulness became identity. That's the part people misunderstand. When you meet someone who seems capable of handling everything, you assume confidence created that ability. But sometimes the ability came first, and confidence was just built afterward. Because every time they solved something, their brain collected evidence. I handled that. Then again, I survived that too. And eventually, their entire relationship with problems changed. Most people see problems as proof that life is falling apart. Fixers see problems as puzzles, something shiftable, movable, temporary. That difference changes everything. Imagine two people hearing the exact same sentence. We have a serious problem. One person immediately feels fear. The other feels focus. Not because they enjoy stress, but because their brain has practiced staying present inside uncertainty. That's a psychological skill most people never realize they're missing, the ability to remain functional before certainty arrives. Because uncertainty is where most people collapse, not the actual problem, the not knowing, that horrible space where your brain keeps screaming, what if this gets worse? What if I fail? What if I make it worse? What if I can't handle this? So instead of acting, people delay, avoid, overthink, wait. But fixers learned something incredibly important early in life. Action reduces fear faster than thinking does. That's why they move first. Not because they're fearless, because they know motion creates clarity. And if you think about it honestly, some of the strongest people you know probably aren't emotionally calm people. They're emotionally practiced people. There's a difference. One of the biggest lies social media ever sold people is the idea that capable people feel less anxiety. They don't. They just don't worship the anxiety. They don't automatically obey it. And that changes the outcome completely. There's another thing you'll notice about people who know how to fix everything. They rarely expect perfection on the first try. That's huge, because most people treat mistakes like identity. One failed attempt, and suddenly it becomes, I'm bad at this. I'm not smart enough. I'm not built for this. Fixers don't think that way. They expect failure to be part of the process, so failure doesn't emotionally destroy them. It informs them. That mindset alone makes someone appear 10 times more competent than they actually are. Because while everyone else stops after the first problem, they keep adjusting, trying, testing, reworking, and eventually, people start calling them talented. But what looks like talent from the outside is often just emotional endurance, the willingness to stay with a problem longer than other people can tolerate. Think about someone fixing a car engine. Most people open the hood, see too many wires, and mentally shut down immediately. Not because they're incapable of learning, but because confusion itself feels threatening. Fixers learned how to stay inside confusion without panicking. That's the real skill, not knowledge, tolerance. And honestly, a lot of intelligent people fail in life for this exact reason. Not because they lack ability, because they emotionally cannot handle the discomfort of being bad at something temporarily. So they quit too early. Meanwhile, someone less talented but more emotionally resilient keeps going, and eventually they surpass them. That's why some of the most capable people in the world were not the smartest kids growing up. They were the kids who kept experimenting after embarrassment, the kids who didn't emotionally die every time something failed. Now here's where this gets deeper, because not every fixer became this way in a healthy environment. Some became fixers because chaos was normal. And if you grew up around emotional unpredictability, you probably learned something dangerous very early. Problems must be solved immediately, otherwise something bad happens. So you became hyper-aware. You noticed everyone's moods, everyone's tension, everyone's reactions. You learned how to prevent explosions before they happened. And over time, you became the person everyone depends on, the calm one, the responsible one, the reliable one. But inside, you're exhausted because nobody realizes the reason you're so good at handling problems is because your nervous system never learned how to relax. You became functional before you became safe. That's why some fixers secretly struggle with something nobody talks about: receiving help. They know how to save everyone else, but when the roles reverse, they freeze. Because being needed feels familiar, but being supported feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Some people know how to repair everything except themselves, and that's the tragedy of becoming too capable too early. Pause for a second and think about your own life. When something goes wrong, what is your first instinct? Do you move toward it or away from it? Do you believe problems are figure-outable, or do you immediately feel smaller than them? Because the answer to that question usually reveals the story you've been telling yourself for years. And most of those stories weren't consciously chosen, they were learned. A child who was constantly criticized for mistakes often grows into an adult terrified of trying. A child who was allowed to experiment usually grows into an adult unafraid of failure. The environments were different, so the nervous systems became different. But here's the important part. None of this is permanent. That's what people forget. The brain adapts, always. Confidence is not something people are born holding. It's evidence collected over time. That's all it is. Evidence. Small moments your brain stores away. I solved that. I survived that. I handled that better than I expected. And eventually, those moments become identity. That's why tiny wins matter so much psychologically. More than motivation, more than inspirational videos, more than positive thinking. Real confidence comes from lived proof. That's why people who know how to fix things usually started small, very small. They learned one thing, then another, until their brain stopped seeing problems as threats and started seeing them as solvable patterns. There's also something strangely beautiful about people who love fixing things, because underneath all the competence, there's curiosity, real curiosity. They genuinely believe understanding something makes life less frightening. That's why they ask questions constantly. Why they take things apart, why they want explanations, why they stay up watching tutorials at 2 a.m. just because they suddenly need to understand how something works. To them, knowledge feels stabilizing. Understanding gives them control. And honestly, sometimes that curiosity becomes the thing that saves them. Because people who stay curious during hard times suffer differently than people who shut down. Curiosity creates movement. Movement creates possibility. That's why hopelessness is so dangerous psychologically. Hopeless people stop experimenting. They stop testing solutions, stop trying, stop believing effort matters. And once someone reaches that state, even small problems feel impossible. But fixers usually hold on to one powerful belief. There's probably a way through this. Not guaranteed, probably. And sometimes that tiny amount of hope is enough to keep someone moving. There's another detail most people miss about capable people. They don't wait to feel ready. They understand something most people spend years avoiding. Readiness is usually created after action, not before it. That changes entire lives, because while one person spends 5 years waiting for confidence, another person starts messy, learns publicly, fails repeatedly, looks stupid temporarily, and eventually becomes skilled. Not because they were naturally better, because they entered the discomfort sooner. That's why the people who fix everything often look calm during chaos. They've already made peace with imperfection. And once you stop expecting perfection, you become surprisingly hard to stop. But there's a hidden loneliness that comes with becoming the capable person. People start assuming you don't need help. They admire your strength so much, they stop checking on your heart. You become everyone's emergency contact emotionally. Everyone leans on you. Few people ask what's happening inside you. And over time, some fixers become deeply disconnected from their own emotional needs because competence became survival, productivity became worth, solving became love. And eventually, they forget something important. You are allowed to exist even when you are not useful. A lot of fixers need to hear that, especially the ones who secretly feel guilty resting, the ones who panic when they're doing nothing, the ones who immediately try solving other people's pain because sitting with their own feels unbearable. Some fixers fixing things becomes distraction, a way to avoid yourself. And that's the twist nobody sees coming. The person who can repair everything around them might still feel broken internally, because external control cannot fully heal internal chaos. You can organize your entire life perfectly and still feel emotionally lost. You can become everyone's solution and still not know how to comfort yourself at night. That's why healing for fixers often looks very strange. It's not learning how to become stronger, they already mastered that. It's learning how to stop carrying everything alone. Learning that vulnerability is not incompetence. Learning that asking for help does not erase capability. And maybe most importantly, learning that their value was never supposed to depend entirely on how much they can repair. Because eventually, every fixer encounters something they cannot solve quickly. A heartbreak, a loss, a burnout, a version of themselves they don't recognize anymore. And in those moments, their usual strategies stop working. They can't optimize grief. They can't troubleshoot loneliness. They can't outthink emotional exhaustion. And that experience humbles them deeply. But it also teaches them something beautiful. Not every problem in life is meant to be fixed immediately. Some things are meant to be felt first, understood slowly, lived through. That realization changes people. Because true strength is not just the ability to repair things, it's the ability to remain human while doing it, to stay soft without collapsing, to stay open without breaking, to stay hopeful without guarantees. And maybe that's the real psychology behind people who know how to fix everything. It's not that they're superhuman, it's that somewhere along the way, they learned that problems are survivable. Learn that panic is not progress, that confusion is temporary, that effort changes outcomes. And once a person truly believes that, they become very difficult for life to defeat. So if you've always been the person who freezes, who doubts themselves, who waits for someone stronger to appear, I want you to remember this. The people you admire did not magically wake up capable. Capability is built. One uncomfortable attempt at a time, one mistake, one adjustment, one small success. That's how people become the person others rely on, not through perfection, through repetition. And maybe the next time something in your life breaks, instead of immediately asking, "Who can save me?" you ask a different question. What if I'm more capable than I think? Because sometimes that single thought is where an entirely new version of you begins.